Hi everyone again. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Barbara. I'm a customer success manager here at GIS Cloud. And with me today is Boyan, our customer success specialist. And today we'll be showing you a bit more about field data collection. And specifically, we're going to be covering some of the best practices that you can learn and take and use in your own project. So first things first, hello Boyan, welcome.
Hello, Barbara. And hello, everyone who's joining.
Yeah, there's a few people here, but I'm sure some other people will be joining us in just a few seconds. But yeah, it's 5 o'clock, so let's just get started. First things first, we're gonna hold just a short presentation where we'll take you through today's agenda and cover the topic of best practices in data collection. Of course, through the GIS Cloud platform. And afterwards, we're going to be showing you things in a live demo because obviously that's kind of the best way to learn and to see things in practice and how you can then take this and use in your own projects. So let's get started. Our agenda for today is covering a few of the data collection use cases. Obviously, data collection is very important in all different industries. So we'll see how that can be used. We'll see what the stages are of a data collection project and what specific stage we're going to be focusing on. And afterwards, of course, what the best practices are in that stage and how you can ensure that you're collecting data that is with quality and, of course, with efficiency. So, when talking about data collection, it's important having sufficient, accurate, and of course, real-time data. It's kind of the key in informed decision-making and in process optimization. So the data collection stage offers the raw material that you need to kind of gain insight into your industry and define the business strategies for your company. So when we consider that, it's of course not a surprise that it's a key element in many different industries. And in GIS Cloud, we do really see them all since we're very industry agnostic. So GIS Cloud is not specifically designed for any particular industry. It's very flexible in that you can use it for whatever kind of project you need. So that can be anything really from monitoring tree species and information about tree and vegetation maintenance, like pruning, disease control, things like that, from monitoring road surface conditions, or maybe doing traffic sign inventories if you're doing a roadworks project. Maybe you are working in electric utility and you are doing the vegetation maintenance management around poles and around cables. Maybe you're just doing customer enumeration for utility as well. Or if you're maybe in telecommunications, you might, of course, need data collection to gather information about towers and antennas and all the other infrastructure so that you can kind of better plan your network coverage and see what else, of course, is around it. Or maybe you're working in water management, you need information about the pipelines, locations for water leaks, data quality checks. So those are all instances where we're doing some kind of data collection. So we have a certain forms, certain questions that we need to ask, and we are, of course, gathering this information in the field. When we're talking about the data collection in general, we have, let's say, 3 stages. So planning the project, setting it up, and then, of course, the field work in the end. The planning step is, I would say, probably the most crucial one because you need to define, of course, what your objective is, what you're collecting, what kind of data do you need, where are you collecting the data, of course, what kind of tool you'll be using, and who's responsible for it. So there are things definitely that you need to consider and that will affect your next stage. So setting up the project itself. But Today, we're not going to be focusing on this initial step. We'll be focusing on the second stage of setting up the project itself. When setting up the project, this is what we're referring to when we talk about creating the forms, creating the questionnaires that are required for you to collect data efficiently. So you need to set up your questionnaires in a manner that it's very easy to use for the field collectors. So, of course, there are still companies who are doing this on paper, but that's of course not as efficient. There's a lot of places for error because paper is of course not as it's easy to lose, and you definitely want to have everything in digital. It's 2023, so there's no need to do it on paper. Of course, location data is crucial in all of the use cases that we mentioned previously, so including that aspect is a must. And the third thing to take into consideration is to set it up so that you can very easily maintain data quality and just kind of make the post-processing step very easy. So that's what we'll focus on today, how to set up a project that works with this, how to set up a project that's easy to replicate, easy to maintain, and set up a project that will, in the end, allow you to collect very accurate data that you'll be able to use later on for your projects. After that, of course, it's just a matter of collecting the data and the field work. Considering you likely need to go offline, of course, that's also one thing you might need to take into consideration when choosing a tool for that. Make it location smart. We already said location is a very important thing to collect in all of these industries. So that's definitely one thing that you need to be prepared for. But to actually go into the topic of today's webinar is what are the best practices for quality control, for ensuring that your data collection project goes smoothly, that everything is collected correctly, and that it's very easy for you to set up and work with. We've kind of identified these 5 practices here that we've seen through the course of working with clients from many different industries. And of course, every industry is unique in its own way. They have their own requirements, their different data that is being collected, but these are kind of things that are always the same. And these are the principles that can be applied to any project and any industry. So what we'll show today is kind of very open for different kind of use cases. One thing that I didn't mention, of course, is we will have a Q&A at the end, but if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the comments and in the chat. But to go over these 5 practices in short before we actually show them in practice during our live demo. So first things first, we have, of course, keep it simple. Whatever you're doing, you want to make as simple of form as you can. You need to consider who's collecting the data, where they're collecting the data, and what kind of environments. You don't want to have someone, in very not so user-friendly application, kind of scrolling through different questions. You want to make it very simple, which is why we would definitely recommend removing anything that's unnecessary for them and showing the field collector only what they actually need. How you can do that is in different ways. One would be maybe to separate different forms, but what's maybe easier is to just use dependent fields and ensure that they work for you when showing the questions to the end user. You'll see exactly how they work in a bit later. And of course, the next thing is to provide additional contexts. In GIS Cloud, of course, we're very focused on the map aspect and the spatial component of everything that we do. So what's very crucial is, of course, to provide additional context through the map. So when we talk about that, we're talking about adding additional information. For example, how users can locate certain assets in the field, how they can arrive to it, what other items they can encounter around them in the space that they're working with, what kind of terrain they can encounter. So these are all things that you can put on a map, provide additional context, and make it a bit easier for the person in the field to not only find maybe the asset that they need to inspect, but also ensure their kind of safety, ensure that they know where they're going. The next one that we have is preventing human errors, because obviously we all make mistakes. That's kind of part of the process. So there's definitely things that we can do here to minimize the risk of that. And minimizing the risk, of course, minimizes the cost of the data collection project, because you're not kind of going out in the field a second time to maybe fix things that were written incorrectly, or you're not losing time in a post-processing part of the project where you need to kind of fix and edit everything twice. So preventing human errors from the start is the simplest way to kind of cut down on the cost of a data collection project. There are a few things that we can do here. So we can use predefined values, so that if we know that, for example, in vegetation maintenance, we are collecting information about trees and we need to define the species. So to prevent users misspelling things or just having a different structure for their answers, we can use predefined answers to kind of help them. And this not only helps ensure the of consistency of our data, but it also makes it simpler for the user who's actually collecting it, because they only need to select the predefined values. They don't have to write down anything. The same really goes for persistent values as well. Persistent values kind of recall the last thing that we've written down, so they can be used maybe interchangeably here. Of course, when you have a larger data collection project, not even a larger, but you want to make sure that only users who actually need to maybe edit something are able to do so, and those who are collecting data, maybe you don't want them to be able to delete accidentally something. So that's why you need to fully manage all permission levels for users. In GIS Cloud, that's very simple to do, because we provide a number of different permission levels that a user can have, so that they can maybe only collect new data, or maybe they can only work on existing data sets, or maybe they don't have the ability to delete data, but they can add new data. So there's a lot of flexibility in that. And that's also one way to prevent the human error part here. Apart from that, there's a number of things that you can collect without the user actually having to do anything. And that's maybe the best way to make sure that it's collected correctly. Things like usernames, for example. So instead of asking the user to write down their name, you simply collect the username automatically, or of course, location, timestamps. So these are all things you can include to not only provide more information to the data that you're collecting, but also ensure that this is being done correctly. It's very simple to accidentally send the same data twice. Of course, we don't want to have any duplicates in the end result, because that kind of invalidates the data that we have. So for that, we can set unique fields. We can set unique fields that are specific to the feature, so that the values don't repeat in a single feature, or we can also look across the whole data set and check for unique fields. So these can be things like unique identifiers, IDs, and things like that. So we'll see that in practice as well. And as the last thing, the last kind of practice is rejecting incomplete submissions. Obviously, we want to make sure that when we're collecting data, we have all of the information that is actually required. So if we set up a project where you literally cannot send the information unless everything is filled out correctly, we're kind of eliminating that incomplete data that can then require either additional field work, or maybe it can also include a lot more time spent in the post-processing as well. So these are the 5 principles that we kind of think can make your project a lot better. These are all things that you can set up in GIS Cloud very simply. So that's exactly what we'll show you today. So we'll create together a simple data collection project where we include all of these 5 principles, and we'll see exactly how they work together and how they and basically make the data collection process quicker, simpler, and more correct in the end. Brian, would you like to maybe take over for the live demo?
Of course, no problem. And now we're in the mobile data collection portal. So this is where we're going to create our form. And we do this simply by clicking on New Project. And for this demo, we've elected to create a form from electric utilities. So basic electric pole survey. You can add some copyright information, or you can add some description of your project, or you can leave these fields empty. We can add a short description, let's say.
You can always do it afterwards as well.
Yeah, you can always edit this later, and we are building a new form, but if you are one of our users, you can always duplicate an existing form and use that as a template. And you choose whether you're collecting point, line, or polygon data, and in our case, it's going to be point data. So let's start creating our project. Okay, right now we already have our first field type, and let's make this a number field. And let's call it ID. So when I click on field options, you can define whether this field is going to be persistent, required, a read-only, or a unique field. Since this is an ID field, let's make this a unique field, so you won't be able to collect any other data that will have the same number or same ID. And when working on a project like this, you can always go back to it and use the same form and same data. For example, this is going to be a new data collection, but you can always update existing data. So you will have the pole IDs, and you can always switch this field to be a read-only field. So nobody will be able to change that value. Okay.
So that's one of our 5 elements here, having unique fields.
Let's add a new field, and this is going to be a text field. So let's say this one's going to be street name. And we're going to make this an autofill field. So what this does is, for example, in our project, we are collecting data about electric poles, and let's say they are all on the same street. So what this does is fetch the value of the nearest feature based on your current location. So if you're on the same street, you've collected 4 or 5 points on the same street, it's going to fetch the value of the closest feature to you based on your location. So you're going to hit the autofill button, and it's going to automatically fill in the street name in our case. And before we move on, let's make the ID field required, and let's make this street name field required as well. Let's add another field, and we can add a date and time. So let's say this is date of inspection. And this is also a required field. This is a very important piece of information. Next, let's add another number field. Let's call this one height. And you can add a description to the field, and let's say and we can make this a persistent field. So what this does, for example, on one street or in one area, let's say that all of the electric poles are the same height. So you won't have to constantly re-enter the same value. So what this means, you will make a data submission, and in the form for the next data submission, this field will already be populated.
Of course, you can change that. So persistent doesn't mean that it's by default like that. It's just you can change it if needed.
Okay, now let's add one of the predefined select lists. Okay, there we go, select list, and we're going to call this field type. And here, let's define the item values, and let's say we're going to say we have wood, steel, and concrete. You can, of course, choose the optional item names. So when you enter a different item name, this will, you will actually, in the data collection app, you will see the item name instead of the value.
It's like a label.
It's like a label. Maybe we can try it out here.
Sure.
Yeah, let's just use capitalized.
Yeah. So the difference really is what you write on the left is what's going to be stored in your database, and on the right is what's visible to the end user. So for example, if you have like a tree inspection and you write down values in Latin for, let's say, species names, you can write the common name as a label so that it's easier for the person collecting the data, just as an example.
Okay, let's add another one of our predefined items, and let's add radio buttons. And we're going to call this one condition. Once again, go to field options. This is a required field. And let's say we're going to have 3 values: good, needs replacement, and the final is going to be needs work. Okay, so the next value I'm going to add, or should I say the next field I'm going to add, is going to be a dependent field, which means that this field will open only if certain conditions are met beforehand. And let's say this is going to be a checkbox field, and we're going to call it work needed. And let's define if it's a required field. Maybe this one doesn't have to be required.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be.
Because it will only be used sparingly. It won't be used
Exactly.
every time. So let's say this is not a required field. And the work needed we're going to have is cleanup, minor repair, and corrective maintenance.
And just to give some context, so we talked about making it simple for the person who's collecting the data, and this is one way to do it. So putting dependent fields so that they're not kind of overwhelmed with all of the questions that are not always needed. So the work needed field, you don't really have to fill it up if the pole is in good condition.
Yeah, right? We're actually going to show in the mobile data collection app how this works and how to define the dependency. I click on the dependencies option, and let's say, yeah, all of the rules need to be satisfied. So you can actually have multiple rules on one dependency, but for this one, we're going to have only one. And let's say the pole condition should be equal to, and what did we say, needs work. So basically we've just copied this item value and added it here. So this will check whether the radio button needs work. And let's close the dependency and option. And what else can we add? Let's add a media field.
Always useful with data collection.
Useful. Let's add a photo field. We can just call it photo. And this is definitely going to be a required field. And now that we've done this, let's add just one more simple text field, and this one isn't going to be mandatory. Text, and let's just call it comments. Comments. Let's make it a multi-line, and let's say just additional comments optional. Okay, now that we've added the fields that the field workers will be actually collecting data into, let's add some of the fields that will collect data automatically. So we can add, for starters, we can add username. And let's say we want to add latitude, longitude. Let's see, and we can add accuracy. And let's add a timestamp. Maybe we should add one more field, show off a little bit more of the dependencies.
Sure.
Okay, and lastly, let's add a signature field. There we go. Let's just say, and let's make this a required field at the end, and let's set its dependencies. So all of the rules should be satisfied. And let's say ID should have a value. Street name should have a value. Date of inspection should have a value. Height, basically, let's add one more. Condition should have a value. Okay, now that we've done creating our form, let's create project. And this auto saves the project, and we have a short form preview. And once this is done, let's open this project. So now that we are in the project, first thing I'm going to do is share this project with Barbara so she can collect some data. And I'm going to give Barbara some collect and update permissions. So Barbara and I will both be collecting some data in this project, so you can see how this works.
I'll be sharing my phone screen with you so that you can actually see how this works on in real life. Let me just share my phone screen with you. Just a second. Let's just refresh this. Okay. There we go. Let's see. There you go.
I've already collected some data, so
that's great. We should be able to see it already on the map.
Be able to see it on the map.
But okay, let me just navigate back to this is our mobile data collection app. So we can go ahead and refresh this and take a look and see where our data set is. Okay, let's select our electric pole survey. So that's the one. and we'll go ahead and click on our form. So that's the form that we just created here in MDC portal. We have our poll IDs, we have the street name where we set up the autofill, date of inspection, poll heights, things like that. So condition, everything. So let's go and fill it up. Let's actually check what did you put for the ID so that we can check our.
I've put 1, 2, 3, 4
1, 2, 3.
for the unique
Perfect.
ID.
Okay, let's add that. So we'll test our unique ID for the poll. For the street name, since we're here in the same office, so I presume that we're going to be finding, yeah, so we already have something on the map. So the autofill fetched the closest feature and
It
pulled
fetched one of my entries, yeah.
Yeah, it pulled the information for that field over here. Then we have the date and time. Of course, when you have date and time like this, you can set it up. Since you can set it up manually, this doesn't necessarily have to be, when something was collected, maybe when the next inspection is due and things like that. And you don't necessarily have to include both the date and time. You can just put one of the other as well. Okay, poll height, let's say 13 meters, poll type wood. And now we can also show off the dependent fields. So if we say that the poll condition is good, nothing happens because we put the dependent field, let's just go back to the form. We put the dependent field on needs work. So only if the poll actually needs some kind of work, an extra field is added. So that's how we kind of keep it simple for the end user. Let's say just kind of minor repairs here are needed. Okay, now for the camera, and I'll take a picture of our map over here. Or not the map, but picture of the mountain.
Beautiful mountainous terrain, yeah.
And now that all of our required fields have values, we also at the bottom have the sign of form items. So there we go. We signed our name, and that's it. We can go ahead and send the point now. One thing that I didn't mention, so you can use either GPS or pinpoint, whichever one you would like to use. If, of course, the accuracy is not that great because we're inside, it should be better when you're outside. But if you want to ensure that the location is fully precise, you can also use an external GNSS device, or just use the pinpoint and then show this. Select the location on the map. So I'll go ahead and send this. This will try to send the data, but you'll see in just a few seconds, it will actually give me an error because we already have the same value. In the meantime, I'll go ahead and I'll send just something else so that we have some more points here. Let's say this one is concrete. And let's use the camera again. Okay, and you can see here at the bottom, my data in the queue that we tried to send before, it's red now, and I'll show you how that looks like in just a second. So this one should go through. And as you can see, it already actually went. So your data will stay here in the queue only if you're actually collecting data offline, which you can also do with the mobile data collection app. But since I'm connected here, I'm online, that doesn't really show very well. But you can see we already have poll ID already contains 1, 2, 3, 4. So what we can go ahead and do is click on that, and we can edit this item. So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, if I say 1, 2, 3, 0, that should work. I don't think you added anything with that ID, and now it goes through. So pretty simple. Let me actually go back to our MDC here, and let's just refresh and open up our electric pole survey here. And you can see here, we already have our data. We have a couple of different collected records. We have things that we added that the user can see, of course. So poll ID, street name, date, pole height, pole type, things like that. We also have all of the photos here. And for conditions where we had needs work, we also have these additional information that displayed because we selected this as the condition. But apart from that, we also have all of these fields. You can see here username, latitude, longitude, accuracy. These are things that were collected automatically. So you didn't see this in the form because those fields are collected automatically. So there's no user input. That means there's no user error, and our coordinates are collected like that. So we also see who collected things, which is great. So you don't have to kind of write down the username for each point separately. Okay, so what you can then do from here, of course, continue working with your data, continue collecting the data sets, and you should be kind of good to go. So you can be sure that all of your data is correct, that the data is consistent, and that you should have a pretty good data collection project now. Okay, I think kind of that concludes the demo part. We'll definitely be going over some additional questions. So maybe that's a good place to switch over to our Q&A. There is a Q&A section in Zoom. There's also a chat, so feel free to send any additional questions that way. In the meantime, while you're writing your questions, we're going to go ahead and maybe try to filter out some of the data so that we can see how the setting up of this data can help us in the post-processing. Because if you remember, so we set some of these fields to have default values, they have predefined values, and that can help things. So for example, if we want to maybe filter out all of the poles that are made of concrete, we can go ahead and filter. Let's say pole type is equal to concrete, and we can apply that, and there we go. So consider that if you have maybe misspellings, or maybe something is written in kind of a capital letters and this is in lowercase, you might need to add more filters here. So if you have things like predefined values with a select list or a radio button field, then you're kind of making it easier to also filter and search through the data sets afterwards. So just one example. Okay, so let's see what questions do we have here. Can this be implemented in existing projects where you already have collected data? Yes, so what we've shown today here is setting up this project through our mobile data collection portal. If you're working in Map Editor, you can then use these same principles to create your project in Map Editor, so create the form there. The only difference is that you have a few different steps, but the form itself, so we can always go back to it. We can always go back to the form and make adjustments to it. The form itself will look exactly the same. You even have a couple of more options in Map Editor because, for example, here, street name, we've set it up as an autofill, right? And this is something that in a project that is created here through Mobile Data Collection Portal, you can only pull from this layer. So only this point layer can be taken as kind of a reference. Whereas if you're working with existing data, you might want to maybe pull data from a different layer, and that's something you can set up in Editor. Just as an example, you're collecting these poles and you want to know which road they're next to, and you already have a layer with roads and road IDs. So you pull from the layer with the roads instead of the same pole layer. Just as an example. Okay, can you set up a project which allows line, polygon, and point data to be collected in a single project? Or do you need a separate project for each type? So yeah, you would need to have a separate project for each type. When you're creating, this is simply because usually you always have, separate geometries in separate layers and in separate database tables. So that's the only restriction here. But you can, of course, put them all on the same map and work from the same map on all three of these layers. And if needed, if, for example, the form is the same, so the data that you're collecting is pretty much the same, maybe you have like an asset ID, you have the street name here, you have the, let's say, what else do we have that's the same for all of them? So maybe photos or some kind of comments or who this is intended for. You can then reuse the same form for different layers and different geometries. Can the project data be brought into QGIS or other GIS software, or is it linked to specific GIS software? Yes, it can definitely be brought into QGIS. So when you're working with data here in GIS Cloud with these projects, what the simplest way for you to pull the data into QGIS would be maybe WFS, so Web Feature Service. From Map Editor, you can actually create a Web Feature Service link, so a URL that you can then consume in QGIS or any other GIS software. So that may be the simplest way where you actually have then real-time data, because as you saw, so we were collecting data, we saw it on the map right away. And if you're using Web Feature Service, you can see the same data set in QGIS right away. So you don't have to kind of download the data, export it in whatever format, and then import it in a different software, because at that point, it's kind of dead data, because anything that comes new, you won't be able to see it. So Web Feature Service, WFS, that's what we would recommend. And you can take a look in Map Editor to see how to set it up. Basically, just copy the URL from there.
Yeah. We got another question about unique IDs. If the unique ID has a string and numerical character, for example, MW001, what is the best field type? In this case, we recommend that the best field type would be string.
Yeah, so text field, if you're setting it up through here, it would be a text field, same as this one, street name here. Okay, let's see the other one. What is your method to understand overall totals? So if working with a large amount of data, I want to see at a glance the total raw number and filter. Does the portal allow to see overall totals, or would you need to manually calculate? So what you can do, so if you're filtering data, you can see that we have a total record number here, if that's what you're referring to. So if we have all of the records here, so nothing is filtered. We have the total records 6, because that's the number of points we have collected for this project. If you're creating any kind of filter, then it will calculate just how many features there are within that certain filter. I'm not sure if that's what you were referring to, but it just calculates how many features there are with that particular value for that particular field. So in this case, how many points do we have that have the pole type concrete? If it's maybe something else that you're referring to, maybe you can elaborate on the question and we can go over that as well. Okay. How do I know how many photo fields I'll need? Well, you don't have to add multiple photo fields. You can add just one and then add multiple photos to the same field.
Yeah, and you can just take a photo, or you can upload a photo from your gallery or album if you already have a photo.
Yeah, and you can select multiple, so it's not limited to one photo per field. Of course, if you maybe specifically need separate photos, like before maintenance after maintenance, definitely do kind of separate those and create two different fields. But in general, if you don't need to have that kind of separation, you can just have the one field and add multiple photos to it. Okay, can you change the map view? I'm guessing you're referring to this one over here. So can we maybe add different base maps and classify the data? Yes, you definitely can. Although this is something that you will need to do in Map Editor. So I can actually open it up here. Just need to log in. Let me just copy our password. Okay, so when you're in Map Editor, we can now maybe add a different base map, like a satellite, just so we can see how that looks. Okay, it's a bit blurry, but yeah, that's up to Mapbox, not us really. So yeah, there you go. So if you need this kind of functionality, you can do it. You'll just need to do this through Map Editor. Okay, we have a clarification. So if the pole height has 4 and the separate line below includes 13. So I'm guessing you want to calculate 4 plus 13. Let me just try to understand. The question. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not really entirely sure what you want to ask, but maybe if you want, so you can reach out to us through our email. Maybe we can see about your specific use case and how you would like to use this. And maybe if we're talking about your own data set in context, maybe that would be a bit simpler for us to better understand, and of course then give you more information about how you can actually use it. So these are our emails if you would like to reach out to us, and of course also to info@giscloud.com. So that's also an email address you can use. So whichever one you want. But yeah, if you're talking about some kind of additional calculations with the data sets, there is an option to create something like a dashboard where you can then, calculate what's the total height of all the poles that you have collected here, for example. And of course, all dashboards are completely custom. So whatever you want to add to it is what we can set up. So if that's something you're interested in, definitely do let us know, and we can see what the best options are for you. Okay, I think we've kind of covered all of the essentials, kind of covered all of the questions that we had. One thing that I do want to mention is nothing that we talked about here is something that you cannot find in our guides. So do feel free to check out our user manuals where you can find this information, find out how to set up these dependent fields, required fields, unique fields, things like that, and how you can make your project much more efficient. Of course, we're always here for any additional questions, so don't hesitate to reach out to us, let us know what kind of projects you're working on, and we can see, maybe if there's a way to optimize your workflow, maybe if there's anything that you can improve on in your project to make it a lot more efficient, cost-friendly, of course. So yeah, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you, everyone. Hope you have a great rest of your day, and see you on the next webinar.
Yeah, see you all soon, and let's hope you reach out to us.
Bye.
Bye, guys.